We start today in New York City, where the kids are finally back in school today. NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres is here, and NBC News chief education correspondent Rahima Ellis. She's outside PS 25 in the Bronx. Rahima, New York City classrooms full for the first time in a year and a half. It is unbelievable. The school system is requiring masks for both students and staff. How'd they do with that today?
Well, there was a feeling of excitement, anticipation, and concern about how they will keep the children safe. One teacher said to me they were excited and concerned because of the children's social and emotional state. They haven't been in these buildings for 18 months, and that was something that they're going to be looking out for. The children had a variety of emotions that they shared with me. I want to share with you. Take a listen. So tell me, how are you feeling today?
Very happy.
Why are you so happy?
Because I really missed this place. I couldn't breathe, but I have to deal with it.
Why are you nervous?
I don't know, I'm just a little nervous.
Are you nervous about what you're going to learn? Are you nervous about having to wear a mask? The mask. And he just points to the mask. That's the thing that was making him a little nervous. But kids overall have a tremendous ability for resilience, and I think they were putting that to the test today. All the kids I saw absolutely had their masks on. Allison?
They sure are resilient, Rahima. New York City isn't requiring vaccines for students, but they are offering them at all schools with kids 12 and up. How is that going?
It seems to be going pretty well, according to the city. They say the numbers right now are something like 2/3, 65% of kids 12 to 17 years old have gotten their first dose of the vaccine. And that means that it's been parental involvement. A 12-year-old can't get a shot unless a parent approves it. So parents are buying into this. And the mayor's office says that means they're going in the right direction towards the safety protocols that they want to have in place in order to keep kids safe. I should mention this. While it's voluntary for the 12 to 17-year-olds to get the vaccine, it is mandatory for the kids who are participating in contact sports, wrestling, football, basketball, that kind of thing. They're required to get those vaccinations. Allison?
So, Dr. John, let's head over to you. Many schools across the U.S. have been open for weeks now. New York a little late to this game. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky on Today this morning, and she was talking about what she's seeing already.
What we have seen time and time again, just in these first couple of weeks of school, is that places that are not practicing the mitigation strategies are the places that are closing. Places that are practicing the mitigation strategies are able to keep their kids safely in school and to keep those schools open.
So, Dr. John, let's talk about those mitigation strategies and what parents can do to protect their kids regardless of what their school districts are doing.
And Allison, I think the main point to remember is that it's not one thing that can keep your kid protected. It's a lot of things. It's that layered approach. They call it the Swiss cheese approach of trying to make sure those holes don't line up and let the virus get through. And that includes masking while they're in school. If they're outdoors and not masking, then they need to space themselves apart a little bit more. Same thing with lunchtime. If they're not masking, space a little more apart there. Cohorts, having pods that these children are in, so that way if somebody does get sick, it doesn't end up affecting the whole school, just those pods. Contact tracing certainly comes into play. And like Rahima was talking about, the vaccinations, and particularly in this case where New York is saying, which I think is a smart thing, if you're in contact sports, then you have more of a chance of spreading these things. So let's go ahead and make sure they're vaccinated and encourage vaccinations in other children. Plus, one of the best things that they can do, too, is at home, make sure that they're practicing those same techniques and those same measures to keep them safe both at home and at school, Allison.
Dr. John, Dr. Walensky also said that she expects a vaccine for kids under 12 by the end of the year and added this.
So we want to move quickly. We anticipate moving quickly, but we also want to have the efficacy data and the safety data that FDA will require so that we know as soon as it is available that it will be merited. The science has gone through the safety and the efficacy to make sure that it is the right thing for kids.
Dr. John, what should parents of kids 5 to 11 know right now so when this shot is approved for them, they are good to go?
And what they should know right now is that they are working very fast to get this approval process, but doing it in a safe way, making sure it's safe and effective. And I've heard anything from mid-October to the end of the year, so it's really hard to tell exactly when this might happen, but it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And so you want to be lined up for when this happens as a parent, so you can go ahead and get your child vaccinated. So that means listening to the news, listening to the science, hearing what's going on. If you have questions, ask those questions now, so that way you have a full understanding when it comes time to get their vaccines. Explain to the children why they need to get these vaccines. And by far, the best thing you can do right now is to protect those children that can't get vaccinated, is to make sure everybody around them, adults, parents, anybody that's around them that can get vaccinated is vaccinated to keep them safe, but then get them ready to get their vaccines so when it's time, they can go ahead and get in line and get their vaccines as soon as they can, Allison.
All right, great advice, Dr. John. Always wonderful to see you.
You too.
President Biden out west checking out the devastating wildfires there. Fire officials in Idaho are briefing the president before he heads to California to tour the damage from the Caldor fire this evening. The president also rallying for Governor Gavin Newsom on the eve of his recall election. We've got team coverage with NBCNews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece and NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson in Mather, California, where President Biden is starting his Golden State visit. Shannon, first to you. The president starting his trip at the National Interagency Fire Center that's in Boise, Idaho. What did he learn from leaders there? And what's his message for the crews working so hard to get these fires under control?
Well, he was certainly there to thank them and to hear from them directly about whether there's things the federal government can do to support them. But a big piece of the message that we heard from him publicly was linking what we are seeing to climate change and acknowledging that, of course, there was always a fire season. There's always been forest fires and firefighters to put them out, but that what we are seeing is fires coming earlier and more frequently. Here's a little bit more of what he had to say.
The reality is we have a global warming problem, a serious global warming problem, and it's consequential. It's not going to get any better than it is today. It only can get worse. You have the smoke from the fires in California on the East Coast, and sometimes blotting out the sky. People are not just worried about COVID, they're worried about whether their kids are going to be breathing.
And he also went on to use this as an opportunity to make a sales pitch for his infrastructure bill, saying that there's billions of dollars in there to help with things like forest fires and climate change more broadly. And he has been using a number of stops for these natural disasters, whether it's in New Jersey, New York, Louisiana, to make the sales pitch for his infrastructure bill and how that would help prevent these type of disasters going forward.
Steve, California's lost 2 million acres to wildfires so far this year. It's just unbelievable to say that out loud. You've been covering these fires from the very beginning. How is this season different?
Well, it's different because it is one of the worst seasons on record for a reason. There are just so many fires that are spread out throughout the state. More than 16 major ones burning right now. As you mentioned, more than 2 million acres this year, some 13,000 firefighters on the front lines of those major ones and dozens of others. The property damage has been enormous. Thousands of homes and structures have burned. Tens of thousands of homes and structures are still in the threat. Right now, two of the biggest wildfires in California history are burning about 150 miles apart as we speak. So the threat has been enormous. The way firefighters have had to combat this has been enormous. But the primary thing that has separated this season from the other ones is this incredible drought that we're in. The brush is drier, the winds have been stronger, climate change certainly stoking all of these factors, which has made the firefighting effort that much harder for those guys on the ground who are battling this, and that much more terrible for citizens who live in these communities, which are fire prone, which, as we're starting to learn, is not just specific rural areas. It really is all over the state at this point. It's happening earlier. The fires are lasting longer. Some of these fires that are burning now have been burning for weeks. That's not something that we've seen in years previous, and it's something that's becoming all too common. Allison?
So, Steve, let's talk about the president's visit. He's going to get an aerial tour of the Caldor fire damage. It's now 67% contained. What do California officials and residents there want to hear from the president?
Yeah, the president will actually be taking off in that aircraft right over my left shoulder in just about an hour or so from now with Governor Newsom to tour some of the devastation left from that fire. Very devastating fire. In fact, one of the last times I spoke to you, I was there. I spoke to Governor Newsom when he was on the ground surveying the damage himself. And one of the things we talked about was just the fear on the faces of people. At that time, South Lake Tahoe was at threat of burning to the ground. And there was a lot of fear and hesitation from people that that might happen. We've since seen that in so many places, so many communities throughout California. So I think really people want to hear, if there is a plan, what is it? I think people want details. They're sick of hearing about an overall threat of climate change, an overall threat of fire in more pervasive areas. I think they want to know if there is an infrastructure bill, if there is funding allocated for that bill for firefighting efforts, what exactly are we going to get here in California? And I think they want to know that beyond suppression, beyond just the firefighting effort. When there's already a fire raging, I think people are smart enough now, and they've been dealing with so much tragedy now that they're concerned about what about the health of the forest when there isn't a fire? What about the fuel load? How do we reduce the fuel that is left for these fires to burn? How about strengthening homes? That sort of mitigation work is something that I think people need to hear about now, and I think they want to hear about now. And I think, you know, I've seen, look, pillars of flames, I've seen towers of smoke, I've seen the air quality above 500, I've seen whole communities destroyed just this year, just talking to you, Allison. But I think now people want to know what there is going to be done to reinforce that effort when that isn't happening.
Yeah. Shannon, the president approved a disaster declaration for California ahead of his visit. What else is the White House doing to help states battle these fires, not just now, but beyond fire season, as Steve mentioned?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously there's these longer range, bigger picture strategy things that people want to see. In the interim, though, the White House says there are a few things that they're doing. You mentioned that disaster declaration. That's going to make California eligible for federal funds, FEMA funds, and the administration is seeking billions of additional dollars from Congress to help pay for these natural disasters, including the fires. And then there's some other real specific things they're trying to do. They're trying to raise the minimum wage for firefighters, which is now $15 an hour. They are trying to get that up. They've also done things like use the Defense Production Act to get more fire hoses. The president said there was actually a fire hose shortage at the beginning of the year. And then, you know, as we get back to these broader issues, like trying to improve forest management so we don't see these issues longer term. So a lot of things the administration is talking about, but of course only time's going to tell whether it's going to make a big impact on the ground there longer term.
All right, Shannon Pettypiece at the White House, Steve Patterson in California, thank you both. Can Governor Gavin Newsom hang on to his job? The California recall election wraps up tomorrow. President Biden stumping with the Golden State Democrat tonight in Long Beach. NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas is at a polling center in East Los Angeles. Guad, East LA, one of the largest Latino neighborhoods in the country. 96% of the population there identifies as Hispanic or Latino, according to the latest census data. You've been speaking with voters there today. What are they saying about the governor?
Allison, the voters here supporting Gavin Newsom. We know that there's heavy support for the Democrats and for the governor among the Latino population. When you look at the estimates, about 58% of Latino voters in California are estimated to register as Democrats. And also in 2018, an exit poll found that 64% of Latino voters chose Gavin Newsom. Earlier today, we spoke to two female voters here who showed up 1 hour before they opened the poll. They said they felt like it was their duty to come out and support their governor. One, because they feel like Gavin Newsom has supported the Latino community. We know that Gavin Newsom selected Alex Padilla. He selected the first Latino senator to represent California after Kamala Harris became the vice president. And Gavin Newsom also set aside funds during the pandemic to help undocumented immigrants in California. So they felt like there's been support from the governor to the community, and they also agreed with his response to the pandemic, something that Gavin Newsom has been heavily criticized for by his opponents. This is what they had to say.
Él estaba haciendo bien, que no puede ir uno ahorita a las escuelas porque pues oiga, se está muriendo mucha gente y luego si no nos cuidamos, pues ¿qué va a pasar? ¿Quiere que nos muramos? No, 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 no.
She's telling me she fully supports all the restrictions. She thinks Gavin Newsom made the right choice by keeping the schools closed for a longer period of time. She tells me she had an argument with a friend about this, but she agrees with the way he's responded because she thinks he's looked out for the health of Californians. And the woman there speaking about all the rules and restrictions in California, mentioning the number of deaths among the Latino population. We know that the community has been affected disproportionately. 46% of deaths from COVID in California are Latino. More than 50% of cases in California are also Latino, Allison.
All right, so Guad, let's take a closer look at the polling. 60% of people oppose recalling the governor. 39% support this recall. That's according to an LA Times UC Berkeley poll from Friday. More than 7 million Californians have already voted. How's it looking for Newsom overall tonight?
So we've been speaking to experts, and they agree that the polling indicates it's all in favor of Newsom. We've also been speaking to a lot of the voters here, and it reflects what the data says. You know, the data says that the Democrats outnumber Republicans in California about 2 to 1. And, you know, for every 3 or 4 individuals that we've been speaking to who support Gavin Newsom, we'll find one that does support the recall. And this is what the early voting reflects. We also have been learning that we know that Republicans prefer to come out the day of the election. The early votes are normally favoring the Democrats. So we're going to have to wait and see in the end how this turns out once everyone comes out and votes. But tomorrow, we do expect a larger turnout across the state.
It's time to check in with NBC News Digital reporter Maya Eglin. She's got the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Maya, what's up?
Hey, Allison, let's start in Alabama, where a heart patient is dead after being unable to find a bed despite staff calling 43 intensive care units across 3 states. COVID-19 is overwhelming hospitals in Alabama, which also has one of the lowest vaccination rates in the country. In Ray Damona's obituary, his family urges those who haven't gotten vaccinated yet to do so, to free up resources for non-COVID related emergencies. A mysterious tragedy at a waste recycling plant in North Carolina, where 2 employees were found dead. The names of the workers and the cause of death have not been released. Valley Protein, which operates more than 24 facilities in the U.S., has not responded to NBC News' request for comment. An investigation is underway. An Oklahoma panel recommends communication in Julius Jones' death penalty case. Jones has been on death row for nearly 2 decades for the murder of Paul Howell. The case has garnered national attention from celebrities like Kim Kardashian and NBA player Blake Griffin. But now it's up to Oklahoma's governor to decide whether he'll change Jones's sentence to something other than death. The World Bank warning 216 million people could be forced out of their homes by 2050 because of climate change. The new report lists rising sea levels, water scarcity, and declining crops as likely drivers. It also says without immediate action, hotspots could emerge as soon as 2030 and disproportionately impact the world's poorest regions. And America's Evangelical Lutheran Church making history installing its first openly transgender bishop. Reverend Megan Roher will oversee nearly 200 congregations across Northern California and Northern Nevada. Nora is one of 7 LGBTQ pastors accepted into the Evangelical Lutheran Church since 2010. Allison, back to you.
Thanks, Maya. Tropical storm Nicholas heading for Texas and Louisiana, and it could bring up to 20 inches of rain along with it. Nearly 10 million people under flash flood watches. Dozens of schools closed today, while rescue teams are ready to go along the Texas coast. NBC News meteorologist Michelle Grossman is here. Michelle, I understand Nicholas is heading for the same part of Texas Hurricane Harvey hit back in 2017. What's the latest on this storm system?
Hi there, Allison. Yeah, it's going to be a big rainmaker, and we've seen these images over the past few weeks of these huge rainmakers, and that's what we're expecting with Nicholas. Not a big damaging wind system, not a big damaging storm surge system, but certainly going to see some winds. So let's take a look at where it looks like right now, where we think it's going to go, because within the next 8 hours, we're going to see it make landfall. So here we are tracking Nicholas. You can see that big rain shield in the Gulf of Mexico, where you see the yellows, the reds, the oranges. Those are the darker, the heavier rainfall. So we're seeing those outer bands reaching the coast, and they have been all day long in Houston, very prone to flooding. So we're going to have a huge concern and watch that very closely. Even seeing the rain falling right now there too. We're also starting to see the winds picking up, not hugely, but near hurricane strength, tropical storm force strength. So we're seeing 36 miles per hour in some spots, 38 miles per hour in some spots. But we're really going to see this pick up overnight. So it's dangerous when we see this landfalling system at night. We could even seeing some landfalling tornadoes as well. So you see all these colors on the map here, hurricane watch still in effect, because it is possible to see this system strengthen to a hurricane, but we think likely it will stay a tropical storm Where you see the oranges, that is your tropical storm warning, and the yellow, your tropical storm watch. So again, the biggest takeaway will be the rain with this system. Right now, winds at 60 miles per hour. That's been pretty consistent throughout the day. Moving north at 12 miles per hour. So it's moving at a nice pace right now. But with all these other systems we've been watching season long, we're going to see it halt as it reaches landfall and move very, very slowly. So it's a tropical system. It has a lot of water. It's going to drop a lot of rain. And that's where we start to introduce those words, life-threatening, flash flooding, and we're looking at situations that could be pretty dangerous over the next several days. So tracking it for you, that landfall somewhere tonight into the overnight hours, and then we really see it slowing down. Those white lines are 12-hour increments. So really by 7 o'clock Tuesday, not going very far and spinning right over Houston. Again, very prone to flooding. It doesn't take a tropical system to get flooding there. And then it'll move off to the north and also to the east. And that rain shield is going to be pretty big, so it's going to be affecting parts of Louisiana as well. Flooding threat, that's going to be your biggest thing here. Flash flood watch, including 8 million people. We will be watching this at least until Thursday and Friday because of how slowly the system is going to be moving. And again, we're looking at the potential for some life-threatening situations. So your rainfall forecast, where you see that orange, that's mainly 7 inches, the maroon up to 10 inches. But we do want to stress that some spots could see 20 inches. I know I kind of always say this, but that tropical system is like a sponge. It holds a lot of water and it gets wrung out, and it's going to get it wrung out slowly. So we're going to see some of the water amounts really piling up. And before I leave you, I want to show you that we do have some other systems. So there's Tropical Storm Nicholas, but as we zoom off to the east here in the Atlantic, we have 2 other issues. I know 2 other issues where we're watching some disturbances. So Allison, peak was on September 10th. So we're right in the thick of it, and we're going to be watching 2 other systems as well.
All right, it looks like we have to keep watching those. Oh, Michelle, I know you said the peak was just on the 10th. You start to feel like the further we get into September that this might be ending, but I know we still do have a ways to go. Thank you so much.
So true. You're welcome.
House Democrats out with a plan to pay for their $3.5 trillion human infrastructure package. But as our NBC News Capitol Hill team reports, the real drama just might be in the Senate, where moderates and progressives can't get past the price tag.
So you're not against this. You could support this $3.5 trillion plan.
I cannot support $3.5 trillion.
Okay, so that is all right, now we're getting to Brad. It is not a time issue. It really is a cost issue.
Many of us made a major compromise in going from the $6 trillion bill that we wanted, supported by the overwhelming majority of Democrats, down to 3.5.
NBC News national political reporter Sahil Kapoor is at the Russell Rotunda. Sahil, the Senate's back from its month-long recess, and they're already getting into a bit of a chicken fight over the human cost of this human infrastructure bill. Who's most likely to budge first?
Yeah, there is real tension, Allison, between the various ends of the Democratic caucus, from Bernie Sanders to Joe Manchin. The bill, the overall price tag of the bill can't be a minimum of $3.5 trillion, and it can't also be the case that $3.5 trillion is too much. They're going to have to find a compromise somewhere in between, and the likely scenario is the number falls a little bit below $3.5 trillion. Nobody really knows where it's going to come down because the centrists have not named their price. In the meantime, House Democrats are moving forward with their version of the bill. You see that on the screen right now. They're marking it up in committee. That includes pay-fors, such as an increase in the top marginal tax rate for certain categories of incomes above $400,000 a year to 39.6%. The entire corporate tax rate is going to be replaced with a graduated proposal where the first $400,000 in business income is taxed at a lower rate than it is currently the case, at 18%. Then it goes up to 21% for incomes up to $5 million, and 26.5%, the top corporate tax rate that House Democrats are proposing. This is, again, a draft. It's going to have to go through some changes before it gets to the House, further changes before it can get all 50 Democratic senators to become law.
And Sahil, how about Speaker Pelosi's September 27th deadline for the House to pass the $550 billion bipartisan infrastructure bill that already passed in the Senate?
That is still the target, but there is real skepticism among Democrats as to whether it can be ready by then. I mean, this is a massive, massive undertaking to get a multi-trillion-dollar safety net package that would overhaul everything from preschoolers having universal access to pre-K to Medicare recipients getting dental, vision, and hearing benefits added to their slate. So there's a lot to work through here. And the September 27th target is mainly because Speaker Pelosi is committed to centrist Democrats that she will put the Senate-passed infrastructure bill to a vote in the House of Representatives. And in order to be able to do that and get progressives on board, the reconciliation bill is going to have to be in a good enough place for them, or they have threatened to vote it down. So this is quite a balancing act ahead for both Speaker Pelosi and Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader.
Sahil, let's talk voting rights. The Senate Democrats are nearing the finish line on a new voting rights bill that can get the support of all 50 Democrats, according to 3 aides familiar with the negotiations. What's in it, and what are you hearing from Democratic leadership about potentially scrapping the filibuster to get this passed without Republicans?
Senator Schumer spoke moments ago on the floor, opening up the chamber after a lengthy recess, saying the Senate could vote as early as next week on the voting rights legislation. That really just means it's not going to be this week. What they have been doing for several weeks now, a group of senators from Joe Manchin to Raphael Warnock, who is probably the most prominent figure in this voting rights battle, to come up with a bill that can get all 50 Democrats on board. Beyond that, as you mentioned, the real goal is getting to 60. If they can't get to 60, and it's almost certain they're not going to get to 60, Republicans are not on the same planet as Democrats in terms of what to do on the issue of voting rights. The question is, does Senator Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema, do they decide to make changes to their position on the filibuster, find a way to get around it or pierce it to pass a voting rights bill, or do they give up and say we shouldn't do anything on voting rights? The filibuster is important enough to be preserved, even if nothing gets done on that. It's a big question. And as far as Democratic leadership is concerned, that option to nuke the filibuster, to create a carve-out, they're all on the table. The question is what those final Senate holdouts who are supportive of the filibuster are willing to do.
All right, Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill, thank you. North Korea back at it, saying it pulled off its first missile test in months on Saturday and Sunday. NBC News' chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell has the latest concerns about the country's nuclear capabilities.
Hi, Allison. North Korea's state-run media says the country's Academy of Defense Science successfully test-fired the missiles this weekend. The test comes amid rising tensions between President Biden and North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un. Overnight, new signs that North Korea continues to build up its weapons program. The country announcing it successfully launched newly developed long-range cruise missiles, its first missile test in 6 months. The test getting special attention because analysts say it seems to show the first North Korean cruise missile with nuclear capabilities. It is also a sign of the growing arms race between North and South Korea, which the United States is watching closely.
Our goal continues to be the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
North Korea's state-run news agency saying the missile test took place on Saturday and Sunday, launching from an undisclosed location, flying for more than 2 hours before hitting targets 1,500 kilometers away, falling into the country's territorial waters. The country's state-run media also indicating that the nation's leader, Kim Jong-un, had not attended the weekend tests, though he has been seen recently, appearing during a midnight military parade in Pyongyang last week, marking the 73rd anniversary of the country's founding, which stirred international reaction with its images of North Koreans in hazmat suits and a much thinner Kim. The United States Indo-Pacific Command releasing a statement on the launch overnight, saying this activity highlights DPRK's continuing focus on developing its military program and the threat that poses to its neighbors and the international community. North Korea has been expanding its nuclear and missile program since the last summit between Kim and former President Trump failed in 2019. It's unclear whether Kim has achieved his goal of having a nuclear warhead small enough to be carried by the new missile.
It is time for the bottom line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. This week, we've got Oracle's earnings, Apple's annual iPhone launch, and some key consumer data. CNBC correspondent Rahel Solomon here to help us start off the week. Rahel, Oracle out with earnings today. We're also hearing from Zoom. Hit us with the highlights.
Hey, Allison. Yeah, so Oracle just reported earnings were a beat, although revenue did miss expectations. And yeah, Zoom hosted an analyst day unveiling some of the ideas that they're working on and building for folks to try to connect better virtually. One new idea is Zoom Whiteboard. The company is saying that it would pretty much act as a digital canvas, allowing participants the ability to collaborate seamlessly with the whiteboard, similar to an in-person meeting. Unclear, Allison, when I'll get back to in-person meetings where we're actually collaborating. But, you know, Zoom is trying to help.
All right, we got to talk about tomorrow. This is a big one. Techies tuning in for Apple's annual iPhone launch event. The predictions flying as usual. What's Tim Cook going to break out, Rahel, according to the analysts?
So we'll likely see the next iPhone models. We may also see new Apple Watches and AirPods. Now, because of the pandemic, this is the company's 7th virtual launch in a row. So Apple has released a new updated iPhone model pretty much every year since its launch in 2007. iPhone, of course, so important. It accounted for half of Apple sales in 2020. So that's always a big sales driver and hard to believe. But the holidays are right around the corner. It's always a big holiday gift. And in terms of what to look for specifically, well, the phone screen size and prices, analysts, Allison, they think that that's going to stay the same, but that the phones may contain larger batteries and they may be a bit heavier. I don't know how I feel about that. That's thanks to a new internal space-saving design. But I do like this. We may see upgrades to the camera and processor. Nothing like seeing your friends take a picture of something and it looks better than yours. That encourages you to get a new iPhone. It does it for me every time.
It is literally the reason why I eventually catch up with whatever iPhone is out, because I just want the better camera. But I'm not into that heavier battery, so I'm not so sure. I might stick with what I got. Let's talk about some other data we're getting out this week. We've got the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, tomorrow, retail sales Thursday, September consumer sentiment Friday. It's a whole lot of consumer data coming our way. What are you watching for?
Yeah, pretty good reads this week on the consumer. So, we'll get CPI tomorrow. Expectation there is 4.3%, which would equal July's rate of growth. The expectation for year-over-year growth is 5.3%, hence why everything feels so expensive. That is slightly lower than the annual rate calculated for June and July. For retail sales, the estimate is a 1% monthly decline from July. And then for consumer sentiment, which, as you know, Allison, is generally how optimistic consumers feel about the economy. Well, economists expect a reading just 1 point higher than August. But remember that the number in August was actually the lowest since December of 2011. So not a huge improvement there in terms of how consumers are feeling right now. Allison?
Yeah, nowhere to go but up in terms of consumer sentiment. Rahel, always wonderful to see you on a Monday. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
Making work suck a little less. It is a mission for Adam Grant, Wharton's top-rated professor for 7 straight years. So how do you find a little more motivation and meaning in your daily grind? I went to Grant's house to find out.
I think we're almost seeing the great flock, which is not so great from my perspective.
Is the Great Resignation about to become the Great Flock, where instead of quitting or starting their own businesses, the next generation of entrepreneurs just takes the career carrot dangled in front of them because the job perks are so attractive? Wharton professor and organizational psychologist Adam Grant thinks we just might be headed there.
I think there's a risk of brain drain, that we're going to see a lot of students who could go build something great in the world say, you know what, I'm just going to choose the predictable, stable career path.
I met with Grant in his backyard because he's on sabbatical this semester, finally taking a bit of his own advice on work-life balance.
COVID happened. I've been encouraging people to do these career checkups and reflect on how they want to spend their time and what contribution they want to make and how their values have shifted. And I should probably take my own advice and do that. So here we are.
If you're watching and wondering who Adam Grant is, you're not one of the 30 million people who have viewed one of his TED Talks or one of his more than 500,000 Instagram followers to whom he dispenses advice on how to make work feel a little less like a 4-letter word.
I'm an entrepreneur of data and ideas. Obviously, I love doing research and exploring new questions, but I'm also really passionate about sharing knowledge and making sure that it gets spread and scaled and applied to try to make work suck a little bit less.
He's also the #1 New York Times best-selling author of Give and Take, Originals, and most recently, Think Again, published this year with invaluable advice for navigating the pandemic world we live in, even though Grant started writing it well before.
I think the first time I really thought about writing it was in the winter of 2018. I'd gone to a bunch of Fortune 500 CEOs and unicorn startup founders and said, hey, there's a growing body of evidence that as long as people are in the office together at least half the week, really the rest of the week, you can let them work from anywhere. And they're more productive, more satisfied, less likely to quit, and there's no discernible cost to relationships. And I wonder if you might want to try a remote Friday experiment just to see what happens. and every leader I pitched balked.
Many of those companies see things a bit differently now.
I think that employers that fail to grant people that flexibility are going to pay a serious price. They're going to have real challenges attracting talented people. They're going to struggle to motivate and retain those people. And over time, I think that they're going to become obsolete, or they're going to have to adapt.
Last week, Grant dropped his latest TED Talk based on an op-ed he wrote during the pandemic about what so many of us have been feeling: languishing.
Languishing is a sense of emptiness, stagnation, and ennui. It was coined by a sociologist, Corey Keyes, and immortalized by a philosopher, Mariah Carey.
The antidote to languishing, Grant told me, is play.
I think it's time to recognize that play is not a frivolous activity. I see it as a path to connection, as an avenue for creativity, but especially as a source of joy and laughter. And those experiences give you energy, and guess what? That's how you get out of languishing. That's how you stop becoming dormant, is you give yourself permission to play.
In addition to that, I think some people are, and listen, I'm going through this myself. Am I reevaluating how I want to live in a post-pandemic world, or am I reevaluating whether this is who I am anymore? You talk about a concept in your book, identity foreclosure. Can you explain to our viewers what that is?
We see people foreclose on what kind of person they want to marry, on what kind of place they want to live in, even on their sexual orientation, right? And I think the danger in identity foreclosure is you anchor yourself to a fixed idea of who you want to become. And that prevents you from growing and evolving and changing.
If you may have foreclosed on your identity, how do you evaluate and start thinking about getting past that? How do you get yourself out of it?
Are you asking for a friend?
Yeah, maybe.
So I think in general, I think a checkup is something we all need to do. So I've been encouraging my students for years to just twice a year in their calendar have a career checkup, which is just like you would go to the doctor, even if nothing is wrong, once or twice a year. Why not do the same thing for your career and also for your life? To ask yourself, in the last 6 months or in the last year, what has changed? What do I need to rethink? It's too easy to get stuck in a routine and then wake up 10 years later and say, I really wish I had rethought sooner. At the same time, I don't want people to do this checkup every week, because then you end up, just constantly ruminating and getting trapped in analysis paralysis instead of actually living and experiencing.
The first trial in the Operation Varsity Blues college admissions scandal started at a federal court in Boston today. The defendants, two dads accused of paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to get their kids into USC. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas joining us. So, Danny, tell us more about these two men and how both sides set up their cases in the opening arguments today.
The prosecution takes a pretty straightforward approach to this case. They're calling them liars, essentially that these folks tried to take the back way in to circumvent what all of the hardworking students in this country do to try to get into college. The defense's approach is no surprise. They're essentially going to argue, look, these parents thought they were dealing with officials. There are people associated with the school assuring them that this is the way you do it. To the outside, to these parents, it looked like a standard case of, hey, if you donate a new wing on the library, then your kids have a better chance of getting in. That's been going on in the United States for centuries. It doesn't mean that something nefarious was going on. That's the defense's approach here, and they're hoping to create reasonable doubt.
Danny, the defense is trying to get its hands on a number of documents that they'd like to present in court. Prosecutors, USC fighting that. What's going on here?
This is just standard discovery battles and admissibility of documents situation. Okay. I mean, probably the most glaring absence of evidence isn't so much documents. It's whether or not, or the issue of Singer, a central figure in this case, apparently not testifying. And you saw that in opening statements, the defense pointing to that empty chair. And sometimes an empty chair can be a very effective theatrical tool in trial. Now, the government, I know exactly why, this is my guess, but I have a feeling I know why they're not calling him, is that he's a huge liability. And they probably think they have enough in terms of emails, video, recordings, whatever the case may be, that they don't have to call this person who has obvious credibility problems. The government's always trying to do that, build evidence independent of the witness that has major credibility problems. And when witnesses cooperate, by definition, they're usually people who have committed crimes. They're getting a break. And because of that break, they're going to have a lot of avenues for a defense attorney to skewer them on the stand. Isn't it true You're doing this just to save your own skin. You'll say anything to get out of prison and get back to your family, wouldn't you? And that's the kind of thing that makes a witness look a little less than credible.
Danny, this is a really salacious case, if you will, America watching to see what happens here. Just because we're so familiar with the story, there were celebrities linked to it. Is there anything else in particular that you're watching for, something legal that may have your attention that the average person who isn't a lawyer such as yourself wouldn't be thinking about?
There may be a huge morality tale in this, not just this particular case, but all the dozens of other defendants who rushed to plead guilty. I mean, this is a pretty common thing with folks who are, you know, upwardly mobile, who don't have a prior criminal history. They just want to do whatever they can to avoid prison. If that includes taking a plea, they'll do it. If these defendants end up getting not guilties, it will really send a major message to all those others who pleaded guilty in such a hurry, and it'll leave them wondering for the rest of their lives, did I have a shot if I had gone to trial? It'll be a question they'll always wonder if these trials ended not guilty.
We'll be watching, and I know you'll be back to analyze with us. Danny, thank you so much. Two tennis stars making history at the U.S. Open this weekend. 18-year-old Emma Raducanu, the first British woman to win the U.S. Open since 1968. And Russian Daniil Medvedev beating #1 Novak Djokovic to win his first major title and blocked Djokovic from completing the first men's Grand Slam since 1969. Today, anchors Hoda Kotb and Savannah Guthrie spoke to the new champs about their historic wins.
Was there any thought in your mind, even teensy tiny, hey, maybe I'll come home the U.S. Open champion?
No, not at all. I mean, 3 weeks ago, I did not think I would last the whole trip. I thought that I'd be home in a week after qualifying. But, I mean, I've just been doing my best to take care of every single day individually and to the best of my abilities. And then 3 weeks later, the time's flown and I was holding the trophy at the end. But yeah, it was the best time of my life here.
Well, before the U.S. Open, before Wimbledon, I think the most people you said you played in front of was like 100 people. I don't know if you heard Miss Guthrie, but I think she was screaming in the audience for you. There. But would you explain, I was just thinking about you right before you stepped out onto the court, like what you must have felt like. Were your nerves out of control or were you calm?
I think before the match, there were a little bit of pre-match nerves in terms of something just didn't feel quite 100% and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It's just a weird feeling, but I think that's as part of the build-up and everything. But as soon as I got out onto court and was just doing what I've done 100 times before, playing and just focusing on the point and tactics and not trying to get caught up in anything, the occasion, I felt completely normal, and it was a great level match because Layla played incredible tennis and we were literally throwing everything at each other. And yeah, I'm just very proud to have come through some tough moments at the end, especially.
Well, she's an amazing player, too. I have a feeling you guys might meet again on the court. What's your plan now, Emma? I mean, it's finally, I think, the end of tennis season. It's the longest season. You're going to bring your trophy home. I mean, who have you heard from besides, you know, the Queen and Duchess Kate?
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very honored to have received a note from Her Majesty and the Duchess, so I am, very grateful. I have got some congratulations, but I haven't really checked my phone yet still. I'm still just trying to really let this moment sink in, and I had a really nice night with my team the night of the final. And yeah, we just discussed and reflected upon an incredible 3 weeks.
Not only did you win your first Grand Slam, you beat Novak Djokovic, who is a legend and who was chasing history himself. How did you pull this off in straight sets?
I still have no idea because, to beat Novak straight sets doesn't happen often. At the same time, I knew that the longer the match is, the more chances he has to win. That's what Novak is about. Physically, mentally, the longer the match is, the stronger he is. So I knew that the faster I try to finish the match, the better. And I'm really happy that I managed to do it without going 5 sets or something like this, because I think that's where I would have less chances to win it.
You were up against a lot. Not only were you up against Djokovic, who's incredible, the crowd wanted it seemed like it wanted Djokovic to take it because he was, as Savannah said, chasing a record. So what kind of a head game did you have to play with yourself to stay in it?
It was tough in the end because I think what we saw actually many times crowd goes against the favorites in New York, and that's what we saw even with Novak in the first round. But then I think they understood that the history can be made in front of them, and that's something special. So during the final, it was definitely not against him, and crowd was completely going for him. It was really crazy. I knew that I have to stay focused on myself. Sometimes it was super tough to do it. And especially, in the end, they tried to give him every chance to win it. I cannot say much. It was just very tough to go against them in the actual end of the match. And after I won the last point, I was like, well, okay, it's over. It doesn't matter now, loud for who, it's just great.
Are you ready for some football? And do you have a vaccine card? The Las Vegas Raiders requiring vaccine proof to enter their stadium for Monday Night Football tonight. Nearly 2,000 fans already saying thanks, but no thanks to the team's mandate this season. Here's NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa.
The strictest rules among NFL teams set to play out at the Las Vegas Raiders regular season opener.
Last season looked a lot like this. Empty stands cleared out by the pandemic. Monday night, a different picture. 65,000 fans will take a seat here, but first, they'll need proof of vaccination.
They can celebrate in the way that they love and remember and not worry about the person sitting next to them.
For the Glass family, the vaccine mandate is what's pushing them through the gate.
It kind of got me over that hump, like, okay, they mean business.
So here's how you get inside. From your home, you download the Clear app. You select Las Vegas Raiders, upload your ID, take a selfie, opt to add your vaccination card, and then you're good to go without a mask.
But the groundbreaking call not considered a touchdown by everyone. A torrent of tweets calling it ridiculous, intrusive, too far. The Raiders reporting 1,800 tickets were refunded or rolled over to next year.
Have you worried that the call might isolate any Raiders fans or discourage people from coming?
We can keep the building full regardless of what the health landscape looks like.
All of the Raiders players have been vaccinated, their opponent with more than 90%. Last month, Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson said he's undecided about getting the vaccine. It's unclear if he's since changed his mind. The NFL promising to dole out strict punishment for COVID outbreaks among unvaccinated players. The infected team could be forced to take a loss. But the NFL's top doc optimistic, with less than 7% of players league-wide without the shot.
About half of the players who came into training camp that were unvaccinated have gotten started in the vaccination process since that time. So we are seeing continued movement.
A pandemic that won't dictate who you root for, but will shape how you do it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.